in a healthy environment. And not only do you learn, skills and all that, but you learn how to behave well with each other. So you learn civility. And so you come out capable and civil to a land of opportunity in which you can, work and have a good environment. And really, that's all you need if a society does that, right? And I think where the things that are going on, education in a lot of public education is deteriorating. It's a real problem. My wife works to help the poorest school districts, the poorest people in the state of Connecticut. And the state of Connecticut is it's always 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest per capita income. And in the state of Connecticut, as of the last survey, 22% of the high school students have either dropped out of high school.
Whoa.
Or have absentee rates which are greater than 25% and are failing classes. So they're living in areas that don't have the things I'm talking about parents' nutrition and so on. And there's not adequate resources for them. For example, during COVID, we found that 60,000 students didn't have computers or connectivities to take classes, and the government wasn't going to provide it. So philanthropically, we bought 60,000 computers and give it to the kids, but we can't do that. So our society is, when you look at this, you see drug problems. You see how the cities are changing. The cleanliness of the cities, the education levels of the cities, mental illness, crimes, and so on. You're not seeing, you're seeing people fighting with each other a lot. Not all the time. There are wonderful places in the United States. Education, some of the best universities, their pockets, some of the their neighborhoods, but there is this encroaching. So you see infrastructure breaking down. School shootings. Okay, so you decide, how are we doing?
I think we're doing pretty badly. I don't know. I mean, look, it's not going to be a popular thing, but I think going back to what you were saying about the parents and maybe asking for 2 people is too much. Look, I get it. I think everybody's doing their best, and God knows, for any single parents out there, you have my love and respect. That it just seems like a hard job when there's 2 of you, let alone 1. So I'm not throwing shade, but in terms of cultural momentum, when I look at people not getting married before they have kids, incentives that end up leading people to where it's actually more economically advantageous to have a child when you're single, does not strike me as a great idea. And trying to reverse that trend, I think, is going to be really important. Really putting a ton of time and energy into making sure that we are looking at ourselves on a global stage from an educational standpoint, and understanding that we are competing against, just to really make it stark, we're competing against China. Now, I have employees that grew up in China. I actually have some contractors that are in China currently. And when I see the discrepancy of what demands the educational system places on them when they're young versus the demands that we place on our students when they're young, it creates a ripple effect as they get into the workforce in terms of just the expectations that they have of themselves, the drive, the desire to excel. So these strike me as really, really problematic things. I'd love to talk to you about Singapore. So as we're talking, and I haven't studied Singapore very closely, but when I think about, how they've created something that seems really amazing very recently and sort of born up out of nothing, is it those three principles? Two parents in the home, quality education, equal opportunity. I mean, is that it, or is there something else?
Earn more than you spend. Be well educated to help you earn more than you spend. Then be civil with each other. Be productive. When you come out equal opportunity, and it's not just like in Singapore, but it's true in other countries. There's a level below which nobody should go. Certainly, children should not go. Right? How can you have an environment that children? There should be basics of housing, healthcare, certain basics, because otherwise you build a cycle. I mean, when the children become adults, you might say, "Oh, it's up to them to do it," but if you mess up the children early, they become the adults who can't do it. And so you have this cycle, in which you have to take care of people. You walk around and look at it. You can see the gaps, the opportunity gaps. You can see the mental illness gaps. Walk down the street and, downtown Manhattan or lots of places and see the gaps. Okay. And that adult who is screaming, and homeless and whatever, came from a place, a reason, that made him that way. And, so it's like why isn't the computer given to the kid who doesn't have a computer so he can have learning? Think about how difficult it is for the kid who doesn't have learning, and they have one parent, and that parent might have in a poverty and might have drug problems and all that. I mean, the kid can't make it. So the kid's going to come up to be an adult. Okay, what kind of an adult is it? It's going to be a problem.
So I know that a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, raise taxes, we'll have money for all of that. That doesn't seem to be how things work, but I'm open to being wrong about that. There's a book coming out I'm very interested to read called Taxes Have Consequences, which I don't think people think a lot about, but it is entirely possible that I'm wrong. So if we look at someone like Singapore, do they just have really high tax rates and they distribute it in a way that makes sense?
What they did was they required savings.
They require it?
Require savings. An employee, I think it works like this. Employee gives 12% of their incomes. An employer gives 22%, 10% of their income. So they saved something like 22% of their income is in savings. Okay. They do other things too. They have a tax balance, but they have a savings. And as a society, they earn more than they spend. Okay, so, and then on housing, for example, they have a public housing that is subsidized, that the person can take their savings with to use to buy that public housing that is a saving through that saving. So everybody has good housing, good public housing, and they own it. So if it goes up in value, they can sell it, and so they have that. So the housing creates a good environment. they put a lot of money into education, equal education. It's not, people there don't have to go to a private school to get good education. So they have good education. And then they have the people who work hard and are civil with each other. And that's how it works. And forget about Singapore. If you look through history, these are basic fundamental things. So wherever they've happened in history, they've worked. And you can go back through all history. If you these basics, earn more than you spend, be well educated, be civil, be productive, those types of things. Those fundamentals work.
What is it about the human personality that makes it so common that people don't deploy those things?
It's so interesting to me because I found that when people get richer, the societies get richer, they typically get in more debt, which seems backwards. So for example, I watched the first time it happened when the United States started borrowing money from China. The United States had income that was per capita income 40 times those from China, and they're borrowing money from China. So I wonder, how does that really happen? And there's when you don't have much money and you're at a stage of life where you value money, you want to save. So there's a psychological thing. You don't have much money, you get some money, and you want to save it. And to save it means you have to lend it to somebody. Then what happens is, ironically, when everybody earns more money and it's easy to borrow, people will get in debt, or society will get in debt, or the government will get in debt. And also then there become very big wealth gaps. And people basically are interested in taking care of themselves. And so you have a fight over taxes or something. And so you have a society that borrows. Just even think the political system cycle. People pay, if you're a new politician and you run a state, or you run, let's say, a state, and it's before an election, it's in your interest to borrow and spend. Because nobody pays any attention to the borrowing, where the money comes from. They pay attention to the spending. So give them stuff, go spend, give them stuff, have a party. It's like having a party on debt. And there's this short-sightedness. It's like raising kids, they call it the marshmallow test, you ask a kid in early age, I can give you one marshmallow now, or I can give you 2 marshmallows in 15 minutes. Which would you prefer? And, okay, the smart one says, I can defer my gratification for 15 minutes and get 2 marshmallows. We have a lot of society who wants it now. So is it enjoyable to take your money and spend it on better infrastructure? Or let's take the education system. The education system, according to the Constitution, is a state decision. So it's not federal, not mostly federal money. Then you come down to the state, and it's mostly a tax district. If you're in this neighborhood through property taxes and so on, you will get the money to educate your children in that tax district. So naturally, richer tax districts will have better money. And so, like, I'm in Greenwich, Connecticut. And last numbers I looked, I'm sure they're higher than this now, but it was not that long ago, is in Greenwich, Connecticut, it was $24,000 per student. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is like 10 minutes up the road, it's $14,000 per student.
Whoa.
And they need more money because they're poor. So if you just take, it's not just education. How do you clothe the kid? How do you feed the kid? How do you give them the computer that doesn't come through the school and all that? They need more, not less budget. So those are the mechanics of it. First, you have to go to bipartisanship. Like if I was president, I would have a bipartisan cabinet. And then if I was dealing with the economic problems, I'd get smart people from the right and smart people from the left who want to make this thing work. And I'd put them into like a Manhattan Project kind of thing. In other words, put them into 6 months in which they have to agree on a system that's going to work. Tie them together and force them to agree and come out with that and have them gain control over the extremists who are going to fight. Like, I don't really care exactly how it works, just as long as, like if smart people from both sides can get together and make it work, and then you come back to these basics, okay, how do you spend more, earn more money than you spend? How do you educate your children well, whether or not, and deal with those problems that way in a together way? You'll get the best outcome. If you don't do that, you won't get the best outcome.
Yeah, I think this is really brilliant. And for people that haven't heard me talk about our company culture before, it's very much in line with this. And these are things that I learned from reading your book, Principles. So when I read Principles, it was really life-changing for me. It was before you and I had ever done an interview, because what I liked about the book is exactly what you're talking about right now, this idea of a bipartisan cabinet. So in my own company, I'm not looking for people to agree with me. I'm looking for people that will challenge my ideas. I'm looking for disconfirming evidence. I want to get the smartest people that I can possibly attract to what we're doing and saying, okay, we need to disagree with each other well, so that we can identify the right answer. To your earlier point, you're going to be wrong so often that if you go into something thinking I'm infallible, I'm going to have all the right answers, you're just headed towards disaster. So my question is, how do we set up a situation where people can disagree well? What is that structure?
I think it starts with worry. I got a principle: if you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because if you worry, you'll take care of the things that you're worrying about to the best possible way. If you don't worry and you just go headlong into these things, you're going to have a real problem. So I think that you have to have people first realize, what does that picture look like if we don't do these things? If we don't have bipartisan, if we don't solve these problems together, if we fight, you have to see the clarity of those two paths and have people choose the good path. Okay, we will figure this out intelligently to make the best possible thing, intelligently and together. Okay. It starts there. It's not a structure. Where does the structure come from? It comes from people, okay? And it comes from people having a need to create a structure and a way of being.
So how do we get people to worry?
Well, maybe what we're doing. I mean, I think they have to worry at two levels. First, enough of us worry that we vote for it, or we use our voting and our others to say, let's vote on together and compromise, and smart people doing these kinds of things. And that's worrying about the society as a whole. And then there's worrying of, as an individual, if they don't do those things, how do I take care of myself? Those are the two types of worries, or two types of impacts you can have, right? So I think they need to think of both of those.
For people that aren't familiar with Lincoln, how much have you looked into him? His idea of a team of rivals sounds like very similar to what you're saying about having a bipartisan cabinet. Is he somebody that you've looked at, or?
I know that I know a bit about Lincoln. I wouldn't call myself an expert, and I know that about him. And yeah, and I think that's really, really great. Yeah.
So when, whether it's at Bridgewater or elsewhere, how do you facilitate people disagreeing well? Because let's say that you have an intern going against your chief investment officer. Like, how would you, do you take that person seriously? They have little to no experience. How do you set that up so that you don't waste time, but at the same time, you get the best ideas?
First of all, you explain to people and you understand yourself how important thoughtful disagreement is. So you remove it, you minimize it from being something that people view as a fight and get upset about. You have to change the attitude about disagreement so that, if you're in disagreement, then one of you is probably wrong. How do you know the wrong person isn't you? And then also, you still have to resolve the disagreement in some way. And so you have to have in place, first of all, an understanding and an intellectualization of that, so you don't get emotionally carried away in thinking, because I disagree, that's equivalent to a fight. Okay, so you have to change that psychology. And then once you do that, then you have to have protocols in place for doing that. Now, in my book, Principles, Life and Work, in the work part of Principles, I've outlined those things, those techniques that can be done repeatedly. So you have to have a system for that. And, and so let me make it very simple examples of that. If you and I are disagreeing and we sort of want to try to get at the truth, things that you can do is to mutually agree on a mediator. So, okay, you could step out of your argument and say, okay, this isn't working. How should we do this disagreement? And maybe let's mutually agree on a mediator. Like, we both agree that person, somebody we can trust and do it through. Okay, that's a good step. Then as you're doing that, carrying that through, you can also say, are you taking in the other person's thinking and replying to that, or are you just blocking? And there are techniques that you can do to demonstrate you've taken it in, okay, like repeat the other's point and so on, and then reply to the other's point, and then do certain things like not interrupt. Or in other words, I have a rule, I call it the 2-minute rule. Somebody says, okay, can you give me the 2-minute rule? That means for the next 2 minutes, I can speak uninterruptedly. So there are techniques that you can use to first understand that it's not a big fight, that there's protocols. Okay, then how do you do that in a hierarchy? Okay, there are different ways you can do that in a hierarchy. But anyway, there are many of them, and we're not going to have the time to go through them, but they're outlined in my book, Principles, Life and Work. They're in the work principles part of it.
Yeah, that's something that we found really effective here is rules of engagement is how we refer to it. So whether it's the 2-minute rule or something else, but ultimately getting people to understand, I'm saying this in the context of somebody who's trying to figure out how we get, we know that the big cycle has a high degree of predictability, and I'm willing to accept that maybe the U.S. can't remain the reserve currency forever. Maybe we're not going to be the dominant world superpower forever, but that I want to handle that transition out as well as possible. And usually phase 5 to 6 ends with literal bloodshed, and things have to get so painful before people can correct course. And so trying to give people a framework, I know you're saying that maybe I'm looking at the structure too much, but I think in frameworks. So what's that rubric by which people can go into, whether it's the 2024 election, whether I think right now we're still in gridlock with the budget or the debt ceiling or whatever it is, giving people ways to navigate through this well. And so my thing is everything begins with the goal. So what's your goal? And even just getting any group to agree on what the goal is. Now, once we know what the goal is, then we can start saying, okay, what people or ideas are most likely to get us there? How do you stress test an idea? How do you know?
I just want to emphasize, though, as you're doing that, the people have got to agree how they want to be with each other first, before there's a structure.